it has that little 3 second countdown. It tickles me every time I see that. Welcome everyone, and welcome to our panelists. This is a real treat because I was just saying before we went live that Rhea and I usually just have one guest, but we have not one, but we have two guests today. So welcome to our LinkedIn Live, which is through the IDC, the Institute for Diversity Certification, and it's the Careers and Collaborations group that Rhea and I work with on LinkedIn. So thank you for that. And we're talking about empathy today. And with our guests, we've had some great conversations. So I can't wait to see how this is going to unfold. But before we get started, let's do some quick intros. So, Dr. Rhea Horton, how are you? You want to say hello and tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Good morning to those that it's still morning. Good afternoon to those where it's afternoon. Good evening if you're from a different part of the world. My name is Dr. Rhea Horton. I'm the CEO of Career Bliss LLC, and I'm so happy to be here with our panel guests as well as with Victor. And I'm super excited for the conversation. So that is all I'm going to say for now.
All right. Okay. And we were talking, Rhea and I were talking about empathy, and there is just so much that is behind empathy. And Rhea thought of someone, I thought of someone immediately, and they said yes. And so I'm so excited for them to be here. The person I was thinking about was Mackenzie Barton. And so, Mackenzie, you want to say hello to everybody and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. This is my first live, so I'm still getting used to it a little bit, but honored to be here and be a part of this discussion. So I'm Mackenzie Barton. I work with Center for Talent Solutions, and we specialize in helping managers engage, develop, and retain their talent. And we do that through equipping them with hands-on tools and actionable solutions. We also work with individuals, helping them align life and work, but it's really through determining what causes them to engage, develop, and want to stay. Now, Victor invited me into this conversation because I specialize in working with Zillennials. So Zillennials are those individuals aged 25 to 35, and right now they are about 40% of our workforce, so holding up that majority. And he thought that I might be able to bring a little bit of a perspective when talking about empathy. So we'll dive into that a little bit more here in a bit, but excited to be here with you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Mackenzie. And Rhea thought about the first person Rhea thought about was Jeff Elliott. So, Jeff, why don't you say hello to everybody and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, first of all, very excited to be here. I think it's going to be an awesome, and I know it's going to be an awesome conversation. My background is in management consulting. That's actually where I met Rhea at a past firm for which we both worked. But I am the owner and operator, title's managing partner, if that makes any sense to anyone, of my own coaching practice. I'm focused on executive and leadership, but I really like to take on two, separate audiences, if you will. One being those that are coming up in leadership, and then the second is those that are looking to refine their leadership skills, and they're already, executives that are doing their thing and looking to just, get a different spot in the boardroom, become better at their vision and influence, et cetera. My main focuses are on folks that are on the margin, but I work with anyone. And then the other piece of what I do in coaching is mental and emotional well-being. I love that. And anyone can reach out to me at any time to find out more. But I'll stop there. And like I said, I'm just excited to be here. So turn it back to you.
Right. Thanks so much. I will be quick because the live is probably starting out on my page. Are we moving this over onto the Careers and Collaborations page, Rhea? Are we doing that? I don't know if that's automatically happen or not. But while you're looking to see if that can happen, I will quickly say I know many that get this or see this recording know me, but I will say that with pride and joy, I'm about to announce and launch my consulting business, Victorious Endeavors. I've always had this for a number of years, but I'm about to go live with a new website where we talk about leadership, my favorite topic, culture, another one of my favorite topics. I do keynote speaking. I go out and do executive coaching and help organizations get their culture right so that everybody wins. And so that's a little bit about Victorious Endeavors. And without further ado, let's start talking about empathy and the things that are underlying with that and how we can help our teams. And so I think, Ria, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, looking forward to starting off the conversation. Why don't we make sure that we have the same understanding when we're talking about empathy for today's conversation? So wanted to ask you, Jeff, what is empathy to you, and why does it matter, or should it matter at work?
I'll keep it simple. For me, empathy is, I think, understanding someone else's perspective. You're not trying to feel what they feel. You don't have to 100% be in their shoes, but I think the effort or the behavior of trying to understand what someone else is doing or where they're coming from is key. And you heard me use some words like feeling and behavior. So when we talk about why it's important in the workplace, those are two big topics that I think that are very important, two themes. Feeling, being able to feel and sense what's happening on your teams and the environment at your workplace. And also, like I said, thinking and understanding what's happening in your environment and with your team members. And that goes a long way. We'll talk about it a bit later, but those are some things that I think are important about it.
Absolutely. What came to mind when you said that was also, I know sometimes in the workplace, there's different lines of thought regarding, hey, this is work, your emotions shouldn't even really matter, and things like that. So I could see there might be a group that's like, why do I need to really understand someone else's emotions and put myself in their shoes? I'm curious, without maybe stepping into some of the other topics we're going to go into, what would be like your initial response to someone like that?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the workplace and, we talk about things like generative AI, blockchain, technology in general, the workplace is becoming more and more transactional, and we're losing focus on the human-centered piece. And so why I think, or I believe it's important, is because for folks to just remember that we're all people, that we can all be seen, and that we can all feel safe in our workplace.
Yeah, we kind of can't dial down our humanity. Like, we're all humans. So absolutely. Thank you for helping to level set that. And then let's see. And I think, Victor, you had a follow-up question there.
Yeah, I think this is where we wanted to get into the Zillennials, right? One of the main reasons I asked Mackenzie to be here. So from your own experiences leading teams or engaging Zillennials, why don't you shape how, from that perspective, talk about that.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of what Jeffrey and Ria were just saying before I dive into that, because a couple of things came to mind. When I think about empathy, it really comes down to two pillars, which is caring and connection. And you have to, because when you really think about empathy, the ability to understand what someone's going through, empathize with their situation, you have to first care about the individual in order to create the place for them to connect with you and share what's going on. You can't empathize with something that you don't know about. And going to Ria's point about, this is the workplace, and this is kind of going into the Zillennial aspect. This is the workplace. People don't always feel like it's the right area to show their emotions, but it's not really about emotion at the end of the day. It's about what drives that person. And I think from a Zillennial perspective, they value work environments where they are seen as a human being, not a cog in a machine, not another number. And a myth that is so often thrown around with Zillennials is that they are not very loyal, they're easy to jump ship, they aren't invested in their organization, but it's really the opposite of that. The truth of that is they will invest where they are invested in, and they will stay where they are valued. So you can approach, I think when we're looking at leadership, you can approach it from one side and say, this is a work environment, it's not about emotions. Reframe that and say, this is a work environment where I have to understand that every single person is driven by different things, different motivations, different aspirations. People are all different. You can't empathize in a general way. You have to empathize on a personal level. So figure out what drives that person to engage, what causes them to stay, what causes them to develop. That's going to help your organization. It's not just about emotions, but it still creates a space for you to empathize. And I think as we get deeper into this conversation, I'll kind of stop there. But that's the difference between Zillennials and their older generations, is they're not afraid to go somewhere else if they aren't seeing that as a part of the environment.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what I think for me and how I lead folks and what I think is one of the better paths forward is when you talk about empathy, caring, and connection. And when you have empathy, that is our topic. From my perspective, empathy, although it is, everybody hears empathy and they think that's a good thing, and it certainly is. But just keeping it 100, being real, saying it like it is, nothing is really happening at that particular moment when we talk about empathy. Yes, you understand where someone's coming from. You're putting yourself in their shoes, which is terrific, but nothing really has happened until you hear, oh, I understand where you're coming from. Now let me do something about that. How can I help you? Now you are showing care. And when you do that, empathy plus helping, or empathy plus care, is compassion. And holy Moses, what in the world is going on in this world today? We could use some more compassion, right? So I just want to make sure we get that, we have that in the discussion as we're moving forward. So having said that, Jeff, I'm turning to you. Leaders, we talk a lot about leaders being intentional, right? How do they build empathy into conversations and the decision making? How does that happen?
Yeah, I think it's things like collaboration. You mentioned compassion, Victor, and I think about leadership and just being a leader in my past, career. It's people just don't want to listen to folks talking all the time. There's this mode of and behavior of not just the compassion piece, but also listening. I feel like listening is going to keep coming up a lot in this conversation. What's more active listening? That's for me the pinnacle of being able to begin to exude the behavior of empathy. And in decision making, like I mentioned collaboration just a second ago, I think that instead of trying to do things on your own as a leader, bringing people in, asking for opinions, and this goes for not just your peers, but also the teams that you're managing. Folks are more at ease. Folks are more collaborative. You see, and I'm going to talk about it later, but you see innovation rise when folks feel like they're able to voice their opinion. They can contribute. They can, have a say in how the business is operating or how their team is operating. So, I think that in short, the collaboration piece is huge, and then that listening piece that I mentioned can open doors in many ways.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Something that comes to mind with what's needed from leaders, the actions from leaders to really motivate, connect with their team members, is truly, I love what has been said, the compassion, the ability to care and have the empathy, active listening, collaboration. I was actually engaging with a Zillennial the other day, and the number one thing she said was, I'm a very loyal person. And if I'm a loyal person, if you're loyal to me, I will, be loyal to you. And so for her, describing that loyalty was like, if you care about me, then I am loyal to you. And so with that, I kind of wanted to ask you, Mackenzie, regarding the largest generation that's in the workforce, the Zillennials. I don't know why I'm stumbling over my words this morning. But wanted to ask, what are their expectations for how their managers should show up, and how does being an empathic leader really impact their perspective and their needs in the workplace?
Yeah. So I think, there's a variety of things that Zillennials are definitely looking for when they're looking at organizations. But if we're specifically talking about their leadership and how they're showing up, I am always going to dial it back to care and connect. So when we're talking about caring, we really see it as 7 actions. It's the easiest way to kind of break it down, and you can always look at this in a bunch of different ways. But it's the ability to, my manager knows the unique me. They make time for me. They are present and in the moment when they're with me. They listen to and hear me. They encourage me. they show an authentic willingness to help, and then they also show concern and empathize with my situation. So you can look at those 7 actions from the beginning, and what we always have managers do is ask yourself, be brutally honest with yourself, and assess yourself on those 7 actions from poor, fair, good, great. If every single one of my individuals were to rate me on a scale, poor, fair, good, great, what would it be? And you don't have to do every single action at a great level, but you do have to do every action at a good or great level. And if a manager goes through and says, I do all 7 of these things great, 100% great, then my encouragement would be do it again, because I think we're all human, right? So it is difficult. While those concepts seem really simple, they are difficult to put into action. And I think that we have to always be looking at empathy as something that's active and not passive. And that's the thing with millennials too, is that they've grown up in an environment where they are on their phones and they are talking about authenticity all the time. So in a very transparent way, they can spot the BS from a mile away. You can't check caring and connection off of a to-do list. It has to be implemented every single day, and that trust has to be built over time. So once you have that foundation of caring in place, then it's about connecting. And I think the important thing to recognize with connecting, and this is applied to all generations, not just millennials, but millennials crave this, is understanding what is important, why is that important, and how is it going? Because when you know those 3 key things, then you can come up with the right actions to move forward. Then you can truly empathize with what they're going through. If you don't know what's important, then you're not going to get very far after that. If you don't know how it's really going, then, what are you supposed to do with that? So we also just find that when individuals have caring and connected managers, they're 51% more likely to stay, and they are 60% more engaged. So this does show itself in the numbers. And I think that it's something that we're seeing culturally really start to shift right now. I think ever since 2020, we started talking way more about well-being and mental health, but now is the time where managers have to get these things in place. And I think that it does require a little bit of training. It does require practice, because it's not naturally ingrained in every single person to do these things, but it's going to become more imperative in the next 5 years.
Absolutely. Like you said, it's a retention issue. It's an engagement issue. And we know that that impacts obviously bottom line and productivity. And then if you compound that with the earlier information that you provided regarding that this generation group has a bad reputation of just not caring and disengaging and things like that, it's probably a symptom to a greater problem, which is their leaders are not caring and connecting in the way that they should be. And so even more incentive to why this is important skill set for leaders to implement, and not just once a month, not just after a training, but continually.
Yeah. So if you weren't taking notes, then you're gonna have to do the playback, because there was a lot in there, and I want to drill down even more on that. So let's talk about what that looks like in daily practice, like coaching on the fly. Let's talk about coaching, feedback, performance reviews. What does that look like on a daily? Mackenzie.
Okay, that's great. Perfect. So that, I think the key in that question is it is a daily practice, right? So we know that you can't have in-depth one-to-ones every single day. There's just not enough time in a day to do that. And based on your manager's span of control, you have to determine the right frequency. But I think that making sure that when you do have those one-to-ones, you are spending quality time. You're going over those 7 care actions again, and I can write them in a chat or we can post them somewhere. But when you are spending quality time in those one-to-ones and you're figuring out what's important, why, and how is it going, you're going to be able to do everything in a much more efficient way moving forward. So when you think about career moves or coaching, when I know those things, I can really tailor my support to help that one individual. If we look at it in terms of feedback, and I know all those different things, you've also already set an environment and a stage for everyone to be really honest with each other. So I can give feedback in a much more effective way that's going to trigger that individual to actually change something. Because often, if you haven't set that stage, I may receive your feedback and not go do anything about it. For all you know, I've already checked out and I'm looking at other job opportunities on the side. So I don't care what feedback you just gave me. And it also sets a stage for a manager to ask their team for feedback on different things, different policies, practices. That's something we see so often in like engagement surveys, that individuals wish they were included in these different organization changes and practices. And I think from just a more basic level, managers have to remember that they are the culture setters. Everything flows from the top down. So I think sometimes it's about dropping your ego at the door transparently and letting your team know, I want to create this space. I want us to feel this way, and asking your team to step into that with you. How do we want to function with each other? And I think this is sometimes much easier when you are face to face with individuals, but now with the remoteness that we have endured, it's become way more difficult. I hear so many stories about teams where they don't even turn on their cameras. I mean, there's literally no connection with each other. And you're getting really quick little messages sent back and forth. So remoteness makes it more difficult. So if you are a manager in a remote situation, it's just going to require a little bit more effort. But once you've created the environment for your team to exist in this caring and connected way, it will continue to flow. People will engage more. They're going to stay longer. They're going to have more positive things to say. So you will feel the fruits of that labor very quickly.
That's awesome.
Yeah, what I really appreciate from that is that you also touched on efficiency, because that is something that I hear from leaders is, oh, this is great, but I just don't have the time. And however, if you have these elements and this awareness and you continue to update your awareness for your team members, it does allow you to be more effective and clear in the feedback that you provide and so forth. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Wanting to pull Jeff into the conversation here, wanted to ask you, how can leaders easily catch the signal if empathy is present on their team or may not be present on their team? Because we know about some of the larger scores from, let's say, an engagement survey, but maybe that's only done once a year. So what are some signals to understand if empathy is there? And then how can they recognize when an adjustment might need to happen?
Yeah, no, that's great. And thanks, Mackenzie. I really loved a lot of what you said. I'm going to go back really quickly to something I missed before. I just want to, outline that empathy leads to trust. And I know we've been circling the theme, but I realized I didn't mention that before, and it's actually going to come into what I'm going to say here. So there was an article earlier this year in April by the Center for Creative Leadership, and they talked about how empathy actually, for managers, empathy actually improves their performance. Folks that are employing empathy as leadership are seen by their peers and their subordinates as high performers. And I think that's really important. So that's one thing. If your leaders are performing well, not just your individual contributors, then I feel like there's probably a sense of, maybe it's not exact correlation, but there's probably some connection to whether or not empathy is at play. Some other things, I mentioned it earlier, but higher rates of innovation. When folks are feeling like they can voice their opinions, like I said before, and come to the table with ideas and challenge what the organization is doing or challenge what the leaders are doing, I think that's a good sign that, empathy is probably at play. And then the other thing I was going to mention before is that, besides how do we know it's one other thing, retention. I forgot retention rates. Mackenzie, you talked about it. Retention rates. Look at your retention rates, because if people are staying, then there's probably trust and empathy at play. But what I was going to say before is, outside of just the, is it happening? The isn't is really important. So I think some ways to kind of notice or become aware of whether empathy is not there are, disassociation during meetings. Look at your meeting culture. Are people actually plugged in? Are they paying attention? Are they just worrying about what thing they have to get done for the, by the end of the day? Because, the way people interact in one-to-one or group settings is a very good indicator. Communication from your peers, especially your subordinates. Again, we talked about it, trust. If people if they see something, they're not saying something, and that is across the whole organization and in any aspect, then, when you have a mute or disenfranchised team, they don't communicate. So you might want to check that out. We talked about retention rates, conflict. Are we having high rates of conflict in the organization? And you'll notice a theme. I'm pointing to culture, right? If people are having conflict all the time and it's not healthy conflict, that's yet another situation or scenario where you might want to check. Mentioned psychological safety earlier, so if people are feeling safe, and that goes with the communication and kind of engagement that I was talking about. Your engagement scores. So we talked about things like the data, that we do seasonally, and we go and we turn the organization around. At least we want to turn it around after that survey or the training that Ria mentioned. But look at your engagement scores and also look at the questions you're asking on the engagement surveys, because those are great indicators too of whether or not people are feeling heard, safe, listened to, etc. And then, if folks seem exceedingly stressed all the time, again, look at whether or not you're exuding empathy. It's a lot for an individual contributor or even a leader to try to take on all the stress of their work by themselves. And again, it goes back to communication. If folks aren't doing these things, then you might want to check what's actually happening. One other thing was poor customer sat and NPS scores, just to make it even more tangible. Look at how your client feels like they're being treated by your subordinates or you as a leader. If you're constantly distracted, if you're constantly delivering poor work, something might be wrong. Check it out. Check to see if you can kind of input some empathy into the daily, as McKinsey and Ria are saying, the daily activities that you're kind of you're doing. So how to address it? I'll try to be quick with this, but feedback loops, we talk about it. What is it? Really just creating a way for people to speak together, not just being, pushing communications and pushing content to people for consumption, but allowing them to do the same for you for consumption as a leader. Having things like fireside chats or coffee talks regularly. Those are, we worked at a firm, Ria, we worked at a firm together where they were really good at that. I'll be honest. Folks were doing it in each region, and then they would set up things after our all hands. What I really like is that they had like town hall meetings and all hands meetings, and it would start with everyone together, and then we'd break off and sometimes come back together. And I think that cohesiveness, that was another thing I wanted to mention earlier, but cohesiveness is a good sign too. So try to implement some of those things, listening sessions and focus groups. And again, I know it takes time, but the time that it takes is nothing compared to the time that you're going to spend hiring more people, figuring out the budget because you spent more money on new head butts and seats, et cetera, or because you've lost a client or whatever that might look like. It's not, trust me, it's not going to take the amount of time that you think it's going to take.
Yeah.
Mackenzie, you said this and you took the idea right out of my head, but like where I did to you, vulnerability. If you're wrong as a leader, just say you're wrong. If something didn't go right as you planned, or your subordinates, your team members were expecting an outcome that just didn't happen, acknowledge it, move forward. We don't have to, again, we're all human. We're all human, and the moment as a leader you show that humanity, like Ria said, it's gonna really open some doors, and people are gonna pay attention because Mackenzie said the same thing. People will know if you're BSing or not. So just please be human, be vulnerable, and then address it. You can address these things as talent management topics for the career performance cycle for your leaders and even your teams. That's fine. And then 360-degree feedback, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But like, if you're not doing that already, folks, or having some kind of leadership assessment, again, not once a year or twice a year, twice is better than one, maybe quarterly. Think about doing that because again, these are all great ways to kind of input empathy into your daily business as usual life. And I've seen it work. So that's what I have to say on that.
Awesome. I heard a few different competencies in there. I heard a bunch of ways that you could track this. And what I loved was the segue on what leaders can do and what they can say, like just come out and say, okay, I messed up on this. So I really want to focus and give our viewers actionable steps to get there. So we talked about a couple of competencies, then we talked about how do we measure, but I still want that middle part. I want to drill down a little bit more. I'm going back to you, Mackenzie. Tell me about actionable steps leaders can take to strengthen empathy in their practice and what they're doing.
Yeah, I think the first thing you do is you have to kind of have a self-assessment of where you're at right now, because the only way to go forward is to know where you're starting. So coming back to those care actions, and you could come up with your own actions, you can use Google for your actions, but figuring out where you currently stand there and figuring out what the current temperature of your team looks like right now. I think after you kind of have a good idea of where you're at, the second thing you're going to do is you're going to bring your team in and have a conversation around what you want things to look like moving forward. Everyone has to know that this is something you're wanting to work on. This is an environment that you want to create. I mean, you can try to do things on your own and try to change little actions in the way that you're showing up. But I think especially if you've been showing up one way and then there's just a stark difference, your team's going to sit back and go, what's going on? What's going on with our manager right now, right? So bringing them into that conversation is the second step. Beyond that, I think that it's then coming back to those one-to-one conversations. And you can always gauge, I mean, Jeffrey gave so many good examples on gauging if empathy is present or not within your team. I think I echo everything he said, and I think the easiest way to figure it out is when you're having a conversation with a one-to-one, the more they share, the more that you have definitely been caring and connecting. The less they share, then that's an easy indicator that you aren't caring and connecting. They are always going to be connected to one another. So that's, I think, the easiest way to tell. Sometimes it's with different individuals too. You may need to put a little bit more time and energy into someone else, and that's only natural, right? Human beings and our personalities, sometimes you click easier with other people. So I think within those one-to-one conversations, again, it's really figuring out what drives this individual, what matters to them, what do they want to do moving forward, what are their career aspirations, really figuring out who that person is and where they're trying to go, and then coming up. I think it's really important for individuals and managers to recognize that you both have to come together to come up with actions and solutions to move forward. It's not just on the individual, and it's definitely not just on the manager. And I think sometimes there's a little bit of a fear from managers that I'm going to have to take all this on and I'm going to have to figure it out. No, you have to work with the individual, figure out what can you do, what can I do, what can we do together? And then make sure you're following up on that. I think that is something I always think about engagement surveys with this concept, but it's so easy to have a conversation about, all right, this is ABC, what we're going to do. And then you never hear about it again. There's no follow up. And people, again, not just millennials, but I think pretty much everyone in this day and age will automatically clock when that type of behavior is repeating itself. So then every single time you ask me, what are you going to do? What am I going to do? I'm not going to invest in that conversation because we're never going to talk about it again. It's just, you're checking this off your to-do list. So it's really looking at empathy, caring, connection as real, authentic, real time. It's a verb. So it's something that you consistently have to practice. And I guess the last little kind of piece of advice, we call them manager drive-bys, but this is not connection. When I'm walking through the office and I'm like, hey, Rhea, how's it going? Hope those new procedures are working out, and I'm already on my way down. That's not connection. That's not caring. Say hello to the people in your office. But I think, managers are so busy. But again, I think Jeffrey said all of this. You're going to spend way more time, way more money hiring someone new, getting them up to speed, blah, 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 blah. So it is worth the time to invest in the people that you have in front of you right now.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that the emphasis on it needs to be done on an individual basis. You can't just I'm just going to do the same thing for all team members. That way I'm keeping it fair and I'm not treating anyone differently. And shouldn't it work for everyone? And then you're surprised when it doesn't and you still don't know and so forth. So there is value in taking that extra time to understand how to connect with each individual member, what's important to them, essentially. And I've also appreciated in our conversation the discussion of how to make things tangible, super easy to digest, as well as those signals to let us know, okay, when something's off, when something's not, so that a leader can then think about change. And so, a question I have for you, Jeff, is thinking about when I think of signals, it does make me think of, is there a way I can measure it? Because we do also know, especially for leaders, how important it is for them to be able to show their results of their time, their work, and their effort. So, how can we begin thinking about measuring the impact of empathy, whether it's present on the team and the impact, whether it's not present on the team and the impact? And we talked a little bit about it, but would love to also dive into how can implementing more empathy also help when a team is going through a transition, whether it's a cultural shift, whether the company's going through some type of change. So can you speak to two of those elements?
Absolutely. I'll try to, because I really do think that what I'm about to say goes for business as usual and also during a change initiative or transformation initiative. So
Mm-hmm.
I want to start with that, kind of position it that way. But I'll say it before I even get started, empathy during transition and change can truly make or break it. So I think about the Kubler-Ross change curve, and a lot of times folks are kind of in the bottom of it basically goes from the bottom of underwear to, performing or doing the thing and adopting it. And a lot of people fall between the middle and the lower part of that curve. And so if you think about the change initiative and the actual tools and the levers that you pull during a transformation, a lot of those have to do with things like communications, engaging stakeholders, and learning and development. And there's change leadership and culture in there too. But like those are already three cool tools that you can look at and kind of get creative about and change how you're using them, instead of just doing we're going to do a learning assessment, for instance, and then we're going to put all these assets out, and then boom, we have a couple of trainings and we're done. And people don't really get the change, and they're also kind of left thinking, this is just more stuff for me to do. Instead, maybe flip it on its head or think about how you can get creative and actually embed some of the things that you're already thinking about day to day into that initiative. So I thought of something when you were talking, Ria, and also Mackenzie, just before. I thought of KPIs during a change initiative. If you're not, this should be a non-negotiable, but if you're not looking at KPIs during a transformation, that's already, that's already a sign that it's maybe not going to be successful. And so why not take some of the things you're working on day to day and embed that into the strategy? Because when it comes down to it, the KPIs in your change or your transformation should be aligning to a strategy to improve something in your business or some things in your business. So why not bring some of that data that you're collecting, or some of those anecdotes, or some of those approaches that you're using for assessments during the year, and make sure that they align to the strategy for the change? Because if the change is not, again, aligned to the strategy, then you're not going to see a lot of success. So I just wanted to start there. And the brilliance is that the findings that you get all year can be used during your transformation as well. So if you're doing an initiative and you say, oh, we already do engagement surveys, but we're doing more pulse checks this year, and it's to try it out, or we've been doing it for 4 years, wherever you are on the spectrum, you can take that data and mix it with the change data. So pulse checks are almost analogous to change readiness surveys. So if you're doing some kind of survey during the change and you're doing pulse checks or engagement surveys during the year, why not make some of the questions similar? They don't have to be 50 to 50, and it shouldn't be 50 anyways. Maybe it's a 10 question survey or a 10 question. You do some interviews and ask those questions live, but embed some of the questions you're asking in your engagement survey, or ones that are kind of analogous to those questions in your engagement survey, in the change readiness survey. So that's one thing to try. Some more like tactical, things for leaders and for team members during the year. So I talked about psychological safety. Again, embedding questions that kind of tell us whether or not, you're kind of taking an ethnographical approach, putting yourself in someone's shoes. That's why I love this word empathy. But like sitting in and and I'll actually tie in another thought about sitting in, but sitting in on meetings, having folks on your team report to you about how things are going, and not in a shady way, not in this, suspect way, but just reporting how things are going, because people do act differently around their leaders. It shouldn't be that way, but people do. And then the other thing was leaders, like, why not sit in on your peers' meetings? we talked about peer-to-peer coaching, but like, I like this idea of auditing. You can do it in school, right? If you've been in a university setting at all, or other learning sessions or settings where you can actually, not get a grade, get a pass fail, and you audit. So the idea of auditing a meeting, it's not about the grade, but it's more about like having someone that you can trust and that you work alongside, sit in your meetings and talk to you about what they're feeling. What's the energy? What do they actually observe? Are people engaged? Because you might think you're the best leader in the world. You might think everyone's engaged, but when people are just yes or no, open or closed-ended answers and responses, when people are rolling their eyes, that's a silent killer in culture. I'm taking that from my friend Tracy. But yeah, it's just very interesting, like the things that you can pick up on, and they may not be huge in the moment, but the small things add up. So I just wanted to talk about those things. And then the data forward approaches, I kind of touched on the 360 and leadership assessments, 360 feedback and leadership assessments. But the idea of 360 feedback is to be able to get feedback from all angles. And I think that's very important, for the leadership journey. And assessments are assessments, but it's what you do with them. And again, what are the questions on the assessments? It shouldn't just be about like getting to some number or some rating, but are you actually, what are they exuding as behaviors as a leader? What are their strengths? What are their, shortcomings or areas for improvement? And then really honing in on both. More the areas for improvement, but both. Like people are human. People aren't just their failures or their successes. They're everything about it. And so I think being more intentional about what you do with the data that derives from those kinds of activities can be a game changer. You talk about engagement and pulse surveys. The exit interviews. We were talking about retention earlier.
Oh.
I cannot tell you on how many HR transformations or how many organizations I've been a part of as a leader where we've let some people go, and they don't conduct the exit survey or interview, or two, it's all about trying to make themselves look good, and then it's not really. It's kind of a moot exercise. But then you go look at Glassdoor or something like that, Indeed, and you're all of a sudden shocked when people have bad things to say. Well, guess what? Let them say the bad things to you or the negative things to you, and take those as action items. Again, even as people going out of your organization, let them be heard. You know what I mean? And there's a chance you might work with this person again. So it's just treating people as a human. It goes back to how we open the conversation. But those are some ways just to kind of get into it and try to put some of these things into action. And like they said, derive some data. Data can paint any story you want it to. So just, again, be responsible as leaders. We have the responsibility to be agnostic and be open-minded and not to be too opportunistic. So let the data tell you what it tells you. And then it's the icing on top is how you address, the areas to improve or the areas to address. So I'll stop. But.
All right. Wow. That was a whole bucket of gems right there. We are coming into the home stretch here. So let's do this. Let's talk about one thing you'd like our viewers to remember about this topic. If there's one thing that they need to walk away from, what would that be? Mackenzie, you kick it off for us.
One thing, I think I'll just come from a Zillennial point of view. Your Zillennials are going to invest where they are invested in. And I do think that is across the board for humans, but it is going to be especially for your Zillennials. And you have to, as leaders, pay attention to it. I think that right now we are still in the beginning stages of Zillennials really pushing their way into the workforce. And there's always a little bit of turbulence when there's a generational shift into who occupies the workforce. But if organizations want to stay ahead of the curve and they want to keep their engagement rates high and their retention rates high, you have to start paying attention now. Don't be one of the organizations that pays attention in 5 years when you're forced to. So people invest where they're invested in, care about your people, connect with your people. They are not employees. They are not cogs in the machine. They are talent. They're valuable, and they have to be treated as such and seen as such. And your Zillennials will spot your inauthenticity from a mile away. So that would be my number one takeaway. And with the connection, what is important, why is it important, and how's it going, then you can take action.
Wonderful. And Jeff,
Yeah, I love.
you have the last word, sir.
Thank you. I'll try to do it justice or do them justice. But I just, the word that's been on my mind this whole time is intentionality. And we used it a couple times. So the thing I would say is just be intentional. Be intentional about the data you're collecting and how you address, the areas of improvement. Like I said in the last section, be intentional about your vulnerability. Don't just try to do empathy. Just be sincere and like Mackenzie said, authentic person. And be intentional about how you listen to people. I think, those things, simply put, are what are on my mind. And I hope that folks will hear at least one thing out of this talk and take away something. But if anything, intentionality is everything.
Yeah. Victor,
Awesome.
before you officially
Yes.
wrap us up, I just wanted to note that, as you mentioned, there were tons of gems shared throughout this conversation. So I have been taking notes. So if you saw me kind of looking to the side, that's what I was doing, was trying to capture all the notes. So I am happy to pull that together, share that, post that, just so it's written down in a place that might be easily accessible. And then, of course, just encourage those, hey, if you need to re-listen to this, please do feel free to do so, because it was wonderful content shared in today's conversation. So thank you so much, Jeff and Mackenzie. But I will kick it back over to you, Victor.
Thank you. And I'm looking to see if there's any comments. I see people were trying to get in, but I see that we're live on LinkedIn, and I know we're live on YouTube. So we'll have to double check and see what is different, maybe in the instructions the next time we go live. I see also people reacting to our live. So I think all things are working correctly there. Thanks for that, Ria. What will I say? I got a few things. So empathy bears trust, jumped off the page at me, bears retention, caring and connection, mentioned a number of times. One of the things that I say when I talk about culture and leadership, one of the things I talk about is making sure that we recognize recognition. And most of the time I say this in the class, I am confident. I'll just ask you three here. You have likely, any organization you've ever worked for, before you went out and did your own practice or what have you, you probably, even the ones that you enjoyed working at, I bet you never went home and said, man, XYZ company recognizes me too much. Never happens, right? And so I tell my team, my leaders, be different. Recognize. And when you think you're done recognize more. Recognize your team more. But my takeaway for this, pulling it into this, is what I heard throughout is measure what we're doing around empathy, what we're doing around care and connection. Make sure we're measuring. So you need to measure. When you think you're done measuring, measure some more, because then you take that data and do something with it. Take action. Be intentional, is what I heard a few times. So, and the other thing I wanted to say about exit interviews, which I think is great, where we're missing it, is what I got from Jeff. We're missing the boat if we're not doing exit interviews, which I would agree are great. The other thing I would say is we're missing the boat if we're not doing stay interviews. Back to the measuring, right? Are we having conversations, those one-on-ones? I heard Mackenzie talk about that a couple of times. Are we doing stay interviews? Let's do that. And I think we will have some great success. So great conversation. We usually wrap up around 45 minutes. I knew we would go a little bit longer because I think this just warrants that. So I can't thank you enough for being here, Mackenzie and Jeff. Ria, as always. The next topic for our live next month is building a personal brand in those 3 scary letters everybody's so afraid of, DEI, which I think is interesting because, Ria, you and I haven't even talked about who we're going to get to talk about this. So those of you that are listening in, those of you that see the recording, reach out to Rhea and I if you want to talk about building a personal brand in DEI. I just had a conversation with someone who has pivoted out of DEI and is doing something else. They have an app that they're doing something which I think is great of what they are doing. It's a well-needed app in the world. If they're, we got so many of them, but this one I think is a good one. But it is away from DEI. But I think that's an interesting conversation to have right now, because I think there are many companies trying to figure out what they're doing around this space. And I bring it up because I am tired of people saying, I thought DEI was dead. I thought there's no DEI. And what are you talking about? Everything that we talked about today has to do with understanding differences of people, right? And knowing what that is. And that is the crux, that is the heart of understanding the whole body of work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So again, I just thank you so much for doing this. Anybody that's interested in talking about building a personal brand in DEI, let me know. Or are we pivoting and just talking about a personal brand? We did that last year. We just did personal branding. But I want to pursue that a little bit more. So I will leave everybody with that. So any final words? We're good?
We're good.
Happy Friday.
Thank you for having
Okay,
us.
thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
I appreciate